hours or minutes, just depending on how interested you are. I will try to speak simply. If I'm going too quickly or don't understand, maybe we can. Now is okay or? Yes. So I tried to talk a little bit about some of the diving we do with Halcyon and GUE. Actually, the nice thing about this type of equipment enables you to dive all around the world. So it's interesting that actually most of Halcyon sales is the single tank systems. Actually, most of their sales is the single tank systems. Actually, but most of the interest is some of the higher level diving that we do. So I will talk about some technical diving that we've done over the last few years. But please understand that he won the Tour de France 2 years ago. This year won by another guy, Jared Thomas. And the cost of people riding to the shops don't need such expensive bikes, but maybe the weekend bike rider, they have a real job like you guys, but at the weekend they like to ride their bike with their friends. And maybe they have aspirations to buy the very expensive push bike to make their biking enjoyment. So you can go to the supermarket, maybe you can buy the push bike $100 or 5,000 baht. Or if you like, you can buy the very expensive and very capable equipment. So this is a little bit like diving. You can choose very cheap and functional and still be able to dive, or maybe you decide this is my hobby, something I love, and I can treat myself and buy something a little bit more expensive and enjoy my diving a little bit more. Okay? So the first project I'd like to talk about is a place called Marlin Head. Okay? And Marlin Head is a very famous place in Europe for wreck diving. So this is mainland Europe. We continue around the world, eventually we get to Thailand. But here we have the UK and Ireland off the coast of the UK. So if we continue in this direction, actually about 5,000 kilometers, you will hit America. Okay, so this big space over here is the Atlantic Ocean. So this has a very good benefit. And the benefit is you talk about cold water diving. People think the visibility very limited and not so much fun. But if you're diving in the Atlantic, the water is beautiful. And you can see here that we have blue water and around 30 meters of visibility. Okay, so it's actually fantastic diving. And we can see a bunch of guys here at around 50 meters. And I'm shooting up with the camera, and we can see them holding onto the line as they finish their dive. So the benefit really is the visibility. The drawback of this type of diving is because it's very exposed. So you're going west, you have to go 5,000 kilometers before you hit the next land. So you can get very big waves, and in fact in the winter the waves can be 6 or 10 meters high, so enormous, right? In the summer we had waves in the 2 meter range, and even then it's quite uncomfortable at the surface. But even with such rough conditions, we still get this kind of visibility. Okay? We talk about cold water diving, and you typically think of no fish or something like that, but actually the fish life is very prolific. So cold water diving can have very nice fish, but unlike here in the tropics where we get lots of different species and many different colors of fish, here we can see 2 different types of fish. But many fish, in fact sometimes there's too many, we want to move them out of the way to take the pictures of the interesting things on the wreck. Okay? This photo taken around 60 meters. So you can see still plenty of light and lots of fish, and you can see some of the wreckage. And this is the reason we went to Ireland, is to dive these famous shipwrecks. And they are sunk in World War I and World War II, and in this part of Ireland, the diving is from 40 metres to over 100 metres, so it's a little bit more than normal recreational diving. We talk about the profiles we're looking at. You can see here that we've got around 80 metres depth, and the bottom time around 50 minutes. So the total dive time around 5 hours. So again, a little bit beyond recreational diving. But the reason I tell you about this is not to show off or something, but just show you what is possible if you're interested in this type of diving. So you can go from a recreational 20-metre, 40-50-minute profile, and with a little bit of practice and a little bit of training, you can build toward doing these types of dives, which personally I never thought I would be doing this kind of diving when I started diving, but eventually you find out what you're interested in, and you can end up doing things you never thought were possible. So we talk about the diving, and actually diving on these wrecks is fantastic, really fantastic in this good visibility and largely protected wrecks, and they're huge wrecks, not small fishing boats like 20 metres long. We're talking about 150, 180, even 200 metre plus length of wreck. And this first dive, a very famous wreck called the HMS Audacious, and it's around 60 metres deep, and we can see the diver next to the propeller there, so you can imagine the size of the ship. And in fact, this ship had many propellers, and the one here even bigger than the first one. So when we're diving, we can see these huge propellers. So we're talking about 3 blades of the propeller and one hidden underneath. And each of these blades is this kind of dimension. So enormous ships here on the bottom. In fact, this is very interesting, but there's some other interesting things, and we're looking around the warships. We can see a gun here, quite a small gun, and we looking around a bit more, and you can see some shells, bullets on the bottom. In fact, these shells, like this kind of size, so you can imagine the size of the gun that shot them. We're looking around a bit more, and we see this small gun. We're thinking this bullet is like this gun is like this, cannot be the match. So we're looking around a bit more on the wreck, and nothing to see. And then we find the 16-inch. So it's World War II. It's imperial measurement. So I don't know what that is in metric, like 55 cm or something like that. But the barrel is this kind of size, and the length is enormous. You can see the diver warped by this gun. So this very fantastic and interesting things for us to see on these kind of shipwrecks. And we can see here again another shot, and you see like 3 divers trying to light up the whole gun, and you get an idea of the scale. The interesting thing about these warships is you always everything tips the ship first. Guns, these warships with heavy armaments and heavy weaponry, they're usually upside down because they're very top heavy, and when they sink, the weight on the top pulls them down upside down. So that's very common for us to see. And we can see here more shots of the same gun. Okay, we then dived another wreck called the Laurentian, and a famous wreck. It had a memorial on the land. So we went to visit the memorial, and it tells us a little bit of information. Unfortunately, many people died when this boat was sunk in World War II. 350 people, in fact. We talk about another story. Those of you with very sharp eyes will see that there was gold on board this boat when it sank. And they conducted extensive salvage, and they were able to recover most of the gold. But something like 10 or 15 bars of gold still somewhere on this wreck. So people are always looking very carefully on the wreck to see what they can find. We can see one of the shells there, and we're talking about this kind of size. Okay? And we see the 6-inch gun here in the car park as the memorial, and the second one from the ship we can find underwater. So the boat captain is very keen for this gun to stay on the wreck, but the local council, they like to take this gun out and clean it off and paint it and put it next to the first one. So a little bit of argument amongst the divers and the council, because they want to keep it. So you can see this one as well was a merchant ship, so not a military ship. It was commissioned in the war, and they put these big guns on the deck, but you see that the wreckage is quite broken. And the reason it's broken is because it's not designed for war, and therefore it's not heavy, and when it sinks, it typically breaks up quite quickly. And we can see lots of broken wreckage, and then the heavy things, like here, the winches for bringing the anchor up are left prominent. So my Chinese grad buddy here looking around for gold, basically. Okay? And he's found something interesting. In fact, it's not gold, but it's a crab. I don't know if you can see the crab here, but the crab, almost like the Thai mud crabs with the big claws and very angry. So we're looking at him, but he's very angry and wants to fight us. He doesn't want to come out and play. And in fact, in Ireland, this seafood protected. So lobsters and crabs protected, you can't take them away. Some places we dive in here, they let you collect seafood, and can be a benefit to diving. When you pick up a nice lobster, you can have a good dinner afterwards. It's quite nice. Okay, and we see more heavy machinery left on the wreck, and then we see the bow of the wreck. You can see the front of the boat lying on its side, and then we can see the bows are intact, but behind it, the wreckage collapsed. Part of the battle, but also because it's not heavy, when it gets to the bottom, over time it tends to collapse. Okay? So this is the Laurentian. We went to another famous shipwreck, this one in 70 meters, called the Justica. And you can see this is the bow of the boat. We can see how the visibility is. Very nice. And then we've got almost like the Titanic type of shot. We're very tempted to get up here and do this on the front of the boat. And it's very scenic, actually. And in fact, we see some noticeable things even for non-divers. We see the anchor still in place on this boat. So really nice diving. And in fact, this dive is very nice because we had a seal, a marine mammal, come down and watch what we're doing. So we're very surprised to be at 70 meters swimming along, looking at the wreck, and then a seal comes. What are you guys it's doing, right? So I pick the camera up, but the camera has big video lights. As soon as we pick the camera up, he goes away. Put the camera down, he's come back, and maybe like 2 or 3 meters away, and as big as me, and he's looking to see what we're doing. Okay, I'll get a photo. No, gone. Right? So very interesting to dive in these places, and we think about the tropics being full of marine life, but actually the cold water marine life can be kind of interesting also. And again, of course, this boat had a propeller and another huge propeller here, and we get some idea of the scale of these things. Here we see that the blade is as long as the Chinese diver, right? So we're talking the blade of this propeller, and this one has 4 blades, being enormous. So this is the size of these shipwrecks is just mind-blowing in this kind of visibility. So it's very exciting to dive in such places. And then we had another dive on a shipwreck called the Audacious, and we're looking around, seeing what's interesting here, and we find lots of very interesting cargo, actually. And you can't really see what these are until we look in a bit more detail, and then this is a tank. Right? So we're diving along the bottom, and you can find like tanks scattered around the bottom like toys. It's like diving in a toy shop with lots of interesting things for us to see as divers. And amazing, in fact. It's like diving in Truck Lagoon, but in Ireland. And we can see the wheels there of some military vehicle, a jeep or a all-terrain vehicle or something like that. And we can see them lying kind of all scattered on the bottom. So it's really fascinating swimming around these dives, looking at these wartime things. So very, very nice. And then, I'm not sure you can, the next one, just to give you an idea of the scale of these ships, these 2 round things, actually the boilers of the engines. So the boilers, you could swim in and be the size of this room, and there were 4 of them stacked along the deck. So we're swimming along trying to work out what these huge things are, and then we realised this is the boilers, because at that time, 60, 70 years ago, we're talking about steam engines in order to run some of these warships. So fascinating. And then we see the fish, they see the divers coming, and they swimming away. So we can get a little bit nice shots from these. Okay, so that's some cold water diving that we did just for fun. And these guys, Chinese people, and they're much the same as Han, the distributors in China, and they started recreational diving and just build up their experience slowly, and today they're doing these kinds of interesting dives. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to talk about is a GV project. And this is a dive that we did not this summer, the summer before. Okay? And you can see my friend JP Bresser, who's a GV instructor, taking a video of a submarine being videoed by another submarine, and me taking video and photographing these guys. So this is we talk about environmental projects, and this is an environmental project that Chile was involved in a few years ago. And basically what we were doing is we went Bermuda. I'll tell you a little bit about Bermuda in a minute. And we explored the deep reefs in Bermuda to try and set a baseline, so a starting point for future monitoring. So we were looking at corals and fish populations in order so that we've got something to compare against in years to come. And this is really what Project Baseline is. And this is a separate entity set up by GUE, but it's really there for any diver to have a place to store information about their local dive sites. So I'll tell you about Bermuda, but you can talk to Will and Sanya and maybe even Han about setting up Project Baseline sites at your local dive sites. So the interesting thing to do is you start collecting information, and as you revisit over time, you can see whether things are changing going on. It's something
we have one.
there you go, you've already got one in place. So you want to,
We see divers.
okay, so you've got a room full of divers, you need to like get their names and recruit them to this kind of initiative. Alright, so it's never too young to do science, and this is a daughter of one of the divers, and she was like 7 or 8 years old. In fact, I was lucky enough to take my son on this trip, and he was 8 or 9, and they were able to get involved in what the scientists were doing. So here she is learning a little bit about corals with a scientist from Cambridge University. So we were really lucky to have tie-in with universities from around the world, and they felt lucky to have us to do the diving for them. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So if you're interested in Project Baseline, you can do a little bit of Googling. You can find us on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook if that's something that appeals to you, and find out what's happening globally with that. Okay, so we talk about these initiatives and why tie it together with Halcyon, and I think we'll talk to a little bit about this, but for me, it's really interesting to find or to have a reason to go diving. I'm not just jumping in the water and swimming around, coming up, and yay, great dive, but we're going under the water and trying to achieve something. Looking for things, we're documenting things, and we're trying to put back into the community, and not just as a professional scientist, but just as a diver. So you guys, as divers, have skills that even the scientists, marine biologists, don't have, because many marine biologists can't even swim, let alone dive, right? So you're able to be their eyes and ears and method of taking information underwater that they would not need to. So why go to Bermuda? So Bermuda, where is it? In the Atlantic again, so Island Head is over there. It's a little dot in the middle of the Atlantic, and zoom in a bit closer, and it's a coral atoll. So it's a former volcano, and you can almost see the shape of the volcano in the island. So as the continental plate has sunk, the coral keeps growing, and you build an island on the top of the volcano that was in place. And this is quite a famous place, Bermuda. You've probably heard of Bermuda Shorts. You may not have done, but Bermuda Shorts, that was the place they're coming from, this tiny little dot in the middle of the ocean. So you can imagine when we were actually diving at some of these more remote places, we're talking a scale here of like 10, 15 miles away from the main island of Bermuda. You surface and you look, and all you can see is blue. And you know 1,000 kilometers this direction is America, 3,500 kilometers this direction is Africa or Europe, and you're thinking, wow, where's the duck bird? And then you turn, You're very happy to see the dive boat when you're in this place, because even Bermuda is the scale of like 10, 20 kilometers wide. In the middle of a huge ocean, you try and hit that just by swimming, I think will be impossible. And maybe they will find you a few months later floating in the ocean, eating fish and drinking rainwater. But probably not, unfortunately. Okay, and we get an idea here of the scenery, beautiful blue water, a typical coral atoll, sort of like the Maldives, for example, where there's very little relief. So there's no hills, there's no mountains. It's basically a flat island in the middle of the sea. And it's very photogenic, obviously, so you get beautiful sunsets, there's very little pollution, and it seems like it's really paradise, and in fact it was. And we can see under the water the coral, actually very nice, but there's something really missing from this shot. Fish, yeah. So you think in this remote location in the middle of the ocean, there really should be some fish for us to see. So if we're in this part of the world, maybe we blame the Chinese, come and steal all the fish, take it back to China. But here we're in the Atlantic, so we can't really say that it's the Chinese, but clearly there's something going on. And in fact, we believe there's like two reasons. One is actually overfishing, and the second is there's invasive species. A species that you're probably very common with here in Thailand, lionfish. Okay, so lionfish is from the Pacific, and in the Pacific there are things that eat lionfish and keep their numbers low. Now they're quite pretty, and you can put them in your aquarium at home and you can look at them, and they have those big spiky fins, and they swim around slowly, and they have a little bit of character, so they'll come and look at you if you're looking at them in the aquarium. So people like to have them in their aquarium. But they can grow big, and they also eat everything else that's in the aquarium. So if it's big enough to fit in its mouth, it will try and eat it. Okay? And in fact, you can search on the internet, you can find pictures of a lionfish this big died eating a lionfish this big. So he managed to get this one in his mouth, and then it's too big to swallow, and they both died. So they're very greedy. And because of that, many people take them from their aquarium and throw them back in the sea. So they believe somewhere in Florida, someone released a number of these lionfish into the Atlantic. They're not supposed to be in the Atlantic, there's nothing there to control them, and they've actually spread dramatically from Florida, all through the Bahamas, and all the way up to Bermuda, actually. And Bermuda is kind of like the northern limit where the water temperature further north starts to become too cold for this tropical species. And the problem is, we actually saw some enormous groupers, like this kind of size groupers, which are way too big for the lionfish to eat. But big groupers start as small groupers, and small groupers of this size are very easy for the lionfish to eat. So overfishing and lionfish, we end up with this beautiful reef, in fact this in around 30 meters, beautiful reef but with no fish because of this double effect. Okay, and we can see, like very common for Atlantic, lots of soft corals on the reef as well as hard corals. Okay, so you put these kind of toys in the water. You can't do it from a standard speedboat. You need a proper ship. And we can see that this boat was actually Baseline Explorer. It was rented by some of the founders of GUE, and they managed to find some sponsorship, and they managed to get some commercial jobs, and they were able to have this boat in the Atlantic driving around for around 2 years. So don't think if you join GUE you're paying for our holidays on this boat. It was actually solely funded by private contributions and commercial work. So it's a very capable boat. We got a huge lift at the back for lifting in and out the submarines. We had containerized labs and dive store actually on the boat, and this was quite a nice way to do the diving. So you can send the container to a location, then you lift the container onto the boat, and then the scientists actually have their laboratory. So they set the container up in Cambridge, they sent it from England over to Bermuda by boat, and then arrived in Bermuda, and they can pick the lab up, put it on the boat, tie it down, connect the electricity, and they have their lab in place. So it's a very nice way to do the diving. And even this big boat, however, starts to disappear into the distance very quickly. And we can see a little diver SMB here, and the dive boat, only 100 or so meters away, starts to become very small. We talk about 500 meters, and we're looking at a little dot on the horizon. So we were very lucky to have a great surface crew. And we talk about the crew. This is just the science team there in the morning. We've got one of the directors, well, two of the directors of GUE, Tom Kincaid and Robert Carmichael, briefing the divers for the day. And of course, we're talking about divers, and we'll break for lunch soon. We see that food is very important. So one of the interesting things about this kind of diving, we were doing 90-meter, 100-meter dives, and we were in the water, in this case, up to 7-8 hours at a time. You don't get to eat lunch. You don't get to eat lunch, so breakfast becomes quite important. The other thing that we found out is the sub-drivers are very hungry. Okay, so they go down in their submarine, and we all get in the water. They look at us driving our scooters underwater and moving around, and they're in this big bubble, and they think, wow, this is not much fun. And after an hour they say, okay, time to go up, and we say, yep, let's go. It takes us 6 hours to get back to the surface. They pull a handle, and 2 or 3 minutes later they're on the surface, they're sunbathing, eating our lunch, right? And then they take a nap, and then they start dinner, and eventually we get out of the water and see if they left us any food. Okay? So we have a large team, and lots of objectives and lots of data for us to collect on a daily basis. And we were trying to put in 3 enthusiastic divers each day. So we had 6 divers, 2 surface support, and what we did is we had 3 divers in the water. This is the blue team, and I was diving in the red team, so the red team all had red dry suits, the blue team had blue dry suits. That was coincidence, it wasn't planned, it just happened to work out that way. But these guys would go diving, and we'd help them at the surface. So we'd get in the water and check them as they were doing their decompression, and then the following day they return the failures. So that was quite a nice team way to go diving. And what it meant is you could actually achieve a lot of science, and this looks like quite a lot of equipment, but if you know about 100-meter dives, and you saw some pictures of cave divers doing huge dives in Wakala, we can see that Susan here is not actually wearing very much equipment. And the reason is that she's taken her equipment off and given it to me, actually. So I've taken all of her additional tanks that she needed for the deep portion of the dive, and here they are at 20 or 30 meters, decompressing, and we've taken all their heavy stuff off them, and we're able to get some shots as they're doing work. But what we found is, actually, you don't need to end the dive when you start to go up in this kind of environment, and we were able to do a dive at 90 meters, come up to 60 meters, do a dive at 60 meters, come up to 30 meters and do a dive. And actually, whilst we were decompressing, we were collecting information. So we were doing science through the whole way through the dive, and not just on the bottom part of the dive, as you could say. Okay, and we had these scooters to play around with. You can see some of these. You plan to actually get them and let them use it in the pool, or?
Yes.
Yeah, so you guys can play around with these scooters. It's really fantastic and fun part of diving is driving these scooters. And you can see here that I've got like 200 or 300 minutes of decompression to do according to my computer. So yeah, a little bit involved, but not too bad. And this is the kind of equipment that we're taking on the dive. That's actually me, but I'm on a support day, so I've just got this, like a set of doubles on me and a scooter, and then we've got JP taking the video here in the water of the previous shot of those three blue divers. So again, we can see the types of profiles that we're doing. This is one of the shallower days, so say shallower, but we've got 60 minutes at 60 meters, then we come up to 30 and we do another 60 minutes. So we've got like 2 hours on the bottom collecting science, and then we got something like 3 hours of decompression. And in fact, in this dive, we came up, then we decided we wanted to go back down and do some more data collection, and then we finished our dive off. So we talk about how much equipment, and you can see here at the start of the dive, when you're fully loaded, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 tanks. This black tube is actually a canister for a big video light. Then we've got a scooter, we've got a camera, we've got video lights for the camera, and all kinds of things. So it's quite involved at the start of the dive. And we talk about, like, as we do decompression, people have different strategies for enjoying decompression, and you can see here that Todd's kind of falling asleep as he's doing his deco, hanging on his scooter, which is quite a good way to pass the time of day. But you can see through here, like Halcyon wings, he's wearing a Halcyon backplate, okay? And we do have a rebreather in the middle there because of the depth and length of dives, but exactly what we'll show you in the pool this afternoon will grow with your diving wherever it takes you. And there you can see, like, that exact light that Will was playing around with earlier is here in place. So you can see the equipment in place. This is a picture of me decompressing, and I just like to look at the fish when I'm decompressing. So we can see just floating around and enjoying the fish life. And people say, oh, how do you do this kind of crazy 5-hour decompression? I really don't even mind 1 minute under the water. Sometimes you look and go, oh no, the surface is just here, I've got so much longer to wait. But then you find something else cool to look at, whether it's a bunch of fish or a little bit of plankton or something like that, or you just switch off and let your mind, like, be mindful, I guess. You just kind of almost meditate, and the time very quickly flies. All right, so let's have a little look at the science, and this is kind of where you can take your science. This is Todd with a stereo rig for video sensors. So what you do is you take 2 cameras and you angle them at a slightly different angle, and you get 2 screens, and because there's 2 of them, stereo, you can actually use that to take measurements. So with this stereo rig, the scientists were actually able to measure the size of any fish that we caught on the the videos. So the process would be to get in the water, to swim along the reef, and to video for a set distance. And then the scientists would take the footage and they would count the fish. And because you've got two videos, you can actually measure the size of the fish. So not only numbers, they can work out size as well, which is very interesting. And we can see here that this little rig actually stowed quite nicely on the diving equipment that we were using. And you can see here again, this is actually at 90 meters. You see the bottom is very different compared to the reef. We can see that it's largely coral rubble. Okay, it's not heads of coral. There's very small pieces of live coral, but it's largely dead coral that's died and then rolled down the reef as we go deeper. And we can see that there's not much light or life as you get deeper, and that's actually what you know from your own diving. The deeper you go, the less you see. It's like the weird thing about divers, they all want to go deep, but all the interesting stuff is in the shallow water. So it's funny balancing act, right? So we compare that here to the shallower transects when we can see the coral all over, and we can see Todd here following a line and videoing so the scientists can work out the percentage cover of coral and dead coral and things like that. So that's quite interesting, and that kind of rig, although it's two, you can obtain quite nice results with something as simple as a GoPro just pointing down and videoing along the reef, so you can get quite useful data about the health of your coral reefs just simply like that. Because we had this stereo system, it actually needed to be calibrated, and it took us about 4 or 5 attempts to calibrate the camera so the scientists could take the measurements. And we see here we've got two divers manipulating this square that needed to be moved around in various orientations so that they could take measurements and get the size things. And then we've got a measuring bar there. So it actually was the hardest bit of the whole project. It's going into like 5 or 10 meters of water and trying to move this square around in a specific way so that the scientists could take their measurements and calibrate the video system. And you can see here us trying again to achieve this objective. And actually the hardest part of the objective is we divers, we like to be flat and we like to be neutrally buoyant. But even when you're flat and still, you're not still enough for this video camera. So you're moving a few centimeters, but it's enough that the scientists couldn't take accurate measurements. And in the end, you couldn't see it here, but we actually had to kneel on the bottom and hold very still. And even the waves, like moving back and forwards, it was very difficult to hold the video still enough that they could get their accurate measurements. We also did a bunch of other stuff, like collecting water samples, and it's quite interesting how much you can do, or how much you can give to a skilled diver to do. So the scientists at the start of the trip are like, oh yeah, you just go in, take a bit of video and that'll be fine. And they quickly start to realize, wow, these guys can do work. Right, we want you to get this many videos, we need samples of this, we want measurements of this, and you end up getting in the water with tapes and bags and machines, and a few of us were actually carrying data collection devices on the back of the reef breather that was measuring temperature and salinity and all sorts of things. So the scientists were very happy to be teamed up with capable divers, and that's something you guys can explore locally. We see here that this was a science project for a PhD student at Pennsylvania State University, and this is like a monitoring station that was left in the water for 3 days. And they turned up with their single tanks, they jumped in the water, and they unfortunately weren't able to deploy the system. So this is Todd putting in their monitoring system when he's got about 4 hours of decompression to do. So the scientists were actually very capable scientists, but they needed to spend a bit more effort on their diving to achieve their objectives. So we were very happy to help with that. And we see here collecting algae samples from the reef so that they could analyse things. And more coral samples collected, and it tends to end up a bit of a mess on decompression with all this stuff. So this is coming in before they've reached the shallow water, and then the support divers would start taking all this stuff off them so that they could end up very comfortable as they finish their dives. Okay, so what's really interesting, the bubble of the submarine is just big enough, you can see, for two people to sit side by side. You've got the pilot and the scientist taking notes. And what was interesting is, through like sign language, he was able to say to the divers, hey, can I have a look at that? Oh, this one? No. Oh, this one, you want to see that, right? And usually when you're in a submarine, you've got this robotic arm that's and it takes them hours to even pick up a bit of rock that they were interested in. We're like, hey, yeah, this one? No, okay, this one, yeah. And put it in their collection bag. Okay, which one now? That one? Oh, yeah, this one? Okay. And they were able to increase their productivity multiple times. However, they're not very mobile, but as I said, get to the end of the dive, they pull a handle and they go up, and we then have the pain and suffering to do from that. One of the nice things about the subs is they're able to go a bit deeper than the divers, and we were going to around 100 metres. They were often going down, and this one's taken at about 300 metres. So they were able to collect some information from a bit deeper than the divers would like to go. And you can see here, it's almost like a desert at those kind of depths. So there's very little ambient light, even in that beautiful, clear tropical water at those kind of depths, and very little light. All right, and here we see we've got a team, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, to get the subs out of the water. And here it's lovely and flat, but these subs are expensive, and if you drop them, they crack, and then they sink, and if there's anybody inside, then that's not good. So they're quite fragile, and they're only able to operate really in the sort of calmest waters, even with this huge diving vessel. The last thing that we got to play around with on this trip, and you think you're cool with your GoPro, that's 32 GoPros. Mounted in every imaginable axis in stereo. So stereo means like double, like your eyes, and with that you can generate distance and depth perception. So here's the stereoscopic GoPro with 32 cameras all orientated around in a ball, and this can make a 360-degree virtual reality film. In fact, this was taken nearly 2 years ago. Things have moved on, and now you can almost get the same capability from a single camera. So you may have seen these kind of action cameras that can get the 360 view. So this is really sort of fascinating part of about some of us that have been diving for 10 years. You think about taking video 10 years ago, you needed a huge camera and a big bag thing, and now you've got a tiny little GoPro, and it's producing much better footage than you were able to get with this huge expensive box from even 10 years ago. So who knows what will happen in another 10 years. It's interesting times. And we can see here the stereoscopic rig being deployed and the divers setting up this station and the virtual reality guys were able to generate a 3D movie from this is on science projects. When I wrote this talk, I didn't have any software of watching the videos and I've on this that GoPro would generate, and that's the screenshot from the video, and you can see that actually this is a full rack, so this would actually wrap all the way back on itself, but it's sort of kind of interesting looking video, and we can see sort of you can get a feel for the three-dimensional feel of the dive environment, and it can be useful for scientists and show your family, for example, what it's like when you go diving, and then you end up with like shots in 3D of the subs, and you can really get an idea of like depth perception rather than the flat image that you get from a traditional camera. Okay, so that's actually me there, and then try actually from the shot, apparently I was too big, so but you have to swim with the rig on the end of the pole as far away as you possibly could to give it the most clear 360 view, so you can almost see like my arm stretched and the pole kind of sticking out, and then it's coming back and it's shooting back that way, and it's the stuff's in there.
How many days were you on
Bermuda, it was 2 weeks. Yeah, so that was a really nice trip, and it's a hope with GUE that we're able to raise that kind of sponsorship again, but this time make it a bit more accessible to people not capable of doing such huge dives. And it was in the Atlantic, and I kept telling them to leave it in the Med, go through the Suez Canal and end up in the Pacific, because we do some really great stuff, I'm sure, in Asia with that kind of vessel. So it was, you take the best dive shot you could think of, and you put it in a container, and you drop it on a boat, and then you can drive it into the middle of nowhere. So diving that's not possible, generally because of logistics, became very easy. You drive the boat up, even a hugely remote site like Bermuda, and you can start doing crazy technical dives. So, cool. So it's like 1:05. You guys are probably hungry and ready for your lunch. So thank you very much. I think it was reasonably interesting. Like, what do you want to do?
So we'll get anything you want to go through.
Yeah. Okay. And then I'll be over there at lunchtime. You want to ask any questions? Cool. Thank you.